There's absolutely no surprise that after 3 years, I'm still playing Genshin Impact, just like the rest of the world. And I wanted to challenge myself by making one prop with 2 different methods of 3D prints, SLA and FDM. Now, there's several different types of 3D printing out there, including one that you can 3D print chocolate. But anyways, I decided to make the Kagura Verity because it's pink. And there's a few items on there that would look really good in resin printing. So without further ado, let's go see if I can pull this off. Here's some 3D model that I picked. I figured this isn't exactly a popular build, so finding a model would be difficult, but Celestial was on my side. Like with anything you print, definitely do your research and check out the 3D modeler's socials to see anyone has printed it. It's important to look closely at the model and look at its mesh. Just as an example, if you look at these 2 balls, one is very blocky and one is rather smooth. The blockiness of the model will show when 3D printing, but on the other hand, the smoother the object is, the more mesh it has, which can make it sometimes difficult for computers to load it into Blender or Cura. So a good 3D modeler will know the in-between that's fine. For example, if you look at this bell, it's a little blocky, but when you bring it into Cura, you cannot tell. This is something you'll develop when you start looking into more models and printing more. There is a way to make a model even better using Blender, but I'll save that for another day, if anyone is interested in it. After looking at this model, the mesh looks incredibly smooth, and I did find someone who printed this already, so let's open it up in Blender. The model consists of 4 major parts, and some of the smaller like the bell and the side razor thingies. I don't know what they are. Having it divided like this creates a lot of supports, and knowing me full well, I would totally break the hanging parts. Plus, I hate sanding, so I decided to bring my resin printer into this. The plan is for all the bells, the bell attachment points, the side razors, and the top small circle, and the bottom circle middle piece all be resin printed. I want to experiment with clear resin and see how clear I can get it for the wings, the bells, and the middle bottom part since they are the same color. I also want to try and make the bells light up because we all know I like LEDs. Luck would have it that the model's objects are still apart, so I was able to bring it into Mesh Mixer and separate each object. 3D printing does create a lot of waste, so I will modify a file to minimize the support needed. Plus, the more I can resin print, the better. Resin is pretty weak compared to FDM printing, so if you follow the same steps, you will have to be more careful with the prop. Once you bring in all of your separated objects into Blender, you have to modify it. I am showing you my completed modifications as I would love to record the process from the beginning, but running OBS and Blender at the same time really slows down my laptop. There are 3 booleans that you have to do. First is on the ring for the hanging bits. Next is the 3 post supports that need to be carved out from the rings and the middle post. The middle section works the same way. The bottom section has a little more to it as the middle wing part will need to slide down the middle post. I'm not too worried about the smaller posts as I will be printing them out at 97% and they don't need to be flush with anything. To deal with the bottom sections, I duplicated the post and upsized it by 1.03% and used that one boolean in the center of the wing. I did test this and printed an FDM test piece to make sure it would go over. In theory, SLA printing is more dimensionally accurate, but doing this method translated it over just fine to resin. I do have a larger 3D printer, so I did merge the middle post sections and printed it out in one large piece. Now onto the bells. Basically, it's the same way as how I do my connecting handles for my swords. First, I'll take it to Mesh Mixer to make it hollow. Blender's Solidify function isn't the greatest at hollowing out objects, so it's always just safer to go to Mesh Mixer. I also slice a bell in half. Usually circles have a lot of mesh, so it's easier to split in, you guessed it, Mesh Mixer. Import both sides of the bell back into Blender, select the top face of the bottom bell and extend it out twice. Grab the new face and shrink them enough to create a flat surface on top of the bell. Once you are happy with the looks, verify that it will fit in the top section. Duplicate the bottom section and up it to 1.03%. Again, you'll have to test this on your printer to make sure your tolerances on your machine. I did print this out in FDM to see it would work and then modified it a bit before testing it on the SLA printer. Onto the slicing. I won't go over Cura much as I did nothing special to the prints, just my normal profile settings. For the handle part, I did select them all and exported, That's why you can see all the connecting points in the preview pan. There is a proper way to connect them all, but time is money and I got things to do. As for the ring, if you have a smaller printer, you'll have to split the larger ring in half to print. In fact, I ended up splitting all the rings in half and printing them up because trying to get the support off the bottom is a big pain. And we all know I just love sanding. Make sure you are strategic with your cuts, unlike me. Make your cuts under anything that will be covered by other 3D parts later. This creates less sanding, and because we are printing this up now, we get less supports to take off, and it's easily more hidden because it's inside the print. On to Softbox, something new and I haven't mentioned here yet. Softbox is the slicing software for resin printing. I'm still fairly new to SLA, but I'm confident enough. This is a middle wing part of the bottom piece. Now, first things first, honestly, it won't fit on the build plate, so it needs to be rotated a bit. Did you know that the best angle to rotate and print resin is 30 degrees to drastically improve your success rate? I was curious about this and I found a nice article online that tested this. I'll link it below if I can find it again. Supports work differently on SLA prints than in FDM. If you move your cursor over the object, you can see the black lines appear. If you see the black lines touching like so, that means that area will need something to attach to be able to print. Now, this program is pretty good at recommending where base support should go, so I usually just start from there. I haven't touched any of these values yet, but I'll save that for testing down the road. Before I send it to the printer, I use Photo Mono Validator. This program will run through the slice file looking for any islands. You can hit fix and this pop-up will appear. An island is a term they use for a section of the print that doesn't have any support to it. Thus, when the resin is cured, that piece won't have somewhere to attach to, so it'll just float in the vat and could totally potentially ruin your print. Anything under 10 pixel islands I really don't pay attention to. You can scroll through the list or hit fix. Then save the file as a newer version, which the program is nice about and adds a version on. Reopen this back up in the application and hit fix again. If it's all green, then you're good to go. All the resin prints I did for this build had no issues, so I had to go back and fix. If you see an island that needs to be fixed, you can go to a Softbox and add more support in that area. I'll go over this in a lot more detail in another video. I don't think you guys want to watch a 30-minute video. I will say this though, Photo Mono Validator only accepts CDD-LP files. The profile for my machine, the Photo Mono X, for some reason cannot save in this, so to work around this, I go into settings and select a different profile, and then once I slice it and save it, I can pick the right file in the drop-down list. Not sure if this has been fixed in the newer versions, but if you can't find the file, hopefully this helps. As for the wing, positioning is absolutely key in resin printing. Because this wing is so large, I can't do the 30% angle on this. The automatic support on this one is not strong enough to hold up the blade. And please don't ask me how I know this. Instead, you have to angle it just enough to get a lot of support on it. Resin is extremely heavy, definitely hollow it out if you can, but since this is printed in clear resin, I didn't want to do that. And I don't mind having this much support on it because resin is very easy to sand. After this, I'll just bring it into the Photo Mono Validator and check my work. I'm still new to resin printing and I've learned a lot so far. I'll keep you guys updated on my journey. If you have any questions about it, leave it below. And off to the printers. Once prints start to finish, the supports are pulled off and it was time for, yep, you guessed it, sanding. As per usual, I start with 120 grit. I did not have to go down to 80 as the supports came off really nice. Then I worked my way up to 220 and then used filler primer. I did each piece separately and I'll have to join them together and worry about sanding the seam down later. I won't get into any more detail than this as I've talked about this before, and I'll probably do a video just about how I go about sanding and what I look for at each stage. Now it's time to put the puzzle pieces together. I did print the support rods at 97%, but they needed to be sanded a little bit more to fit. For the posts, I just used super glue to set them in. Since they are inset into the model, they will have enough surface area for a nice bond rather than putting two flush pieces together. For attaching the rings, they are two flush pieces, so I did use the soldering method that you have seen everyone use at this point. Since the bottom rods go through the bottom wing part, I had to make sure that they were all really pushed in, as if anything was sticking out, the bottom rings would not line up. I was lucky that all three rings pretty much lined up perfectly, so I had nothing to worry about. It all comes down to good settings on your printer. At this point, I realized that the bottom wing part isn't all purple, that some of this roll is actually gold. So I decided to stop here and mess up the parts that still needed to be purple. I wouldn't have been able to do this if I had put the top 2 rings on, and it's a lot more difficult to paint. So I also gave a base coat of white to the entire thing. I initially was planning on painting the middle handle at this point in time too, but I forgot, so I struggled more during painting. And now to the middle ring and top ring, and then soldering the rings together and some spot putty and sanding. Lots more sanding.
On to the more exciting part, resin. After doing a test print in FDM, it was time to print, cure, and then remove the support. Yes, I do remove the support after the curing process. I'd rather not have uncured resin support flying all over the room, as this stuff is toxic and shouldn't be left laying around. Resin is super easy to sand anyways, so if the support leaves marks, it's very easy to get rid of. I use a pink resin dye to change the color of the clear resin. I couldn't find clear pink, so resorted to this. I quite like this color, however, I did not put enough of the dye in the centerpiece, so now it just looks clear. I didn't want to reprint it because resin is very expensive. Now it's sanding time. Yes, resin does require sanding, especially with supports and if you are trying to make it clear like I am. Please wear your safety gear when you are sanding resin. It brings up a lot of little particles and you don't want to breathe that in. I watched and researched several different sites to figure out the best method with the supplies I currently have. I didn't do all 3 pieces at the same time, so let's do some comparison. The one on the right has freshly removed supports and you can see how bumpy it is. This is why you still need to sand resin. The middle one is after sanding, so for sanding I started with 120, went to 220, and then on to wet sanding. I used 400 wet sandpaper and then made my way up to 1000. And the last one has all the sanding done previously, plus a glossy clear coat on both back and front. I did go back and wet sanded the last one again as a clear coat was runny, so I did fix that. I'm excited to experiment more with resin printing, as I'm happy with how these came out. Another experiment was for the bells. The top is straight out of post-processing, while the bottom has a clear coat. Anytime I do anything with LEDs, I try and diffuse them. Out of the 3, I like the diffused bell with no clear coat, as the cloudiness of the original helps with that diffusion. The left here is a normal without anything, just the LED, the center is a clear coat, and the end is with the diffusion. The LEDs I used are these small LEDs for balloons. They are just one single LED attached to some batteries, and these things will definitely last you a whole con. Great little way to add LEDs to projects when you don't want to solder or have a tight space, but you do need to be able to access the area. For diffusion, I went with a little wad of poly stuffing as it's small enough to fit. Painting time! I'll keep this quick because it's basically the same thing I do every time. First, white base coat on everything, including the resin pieces that aren't clear. Then a black base coat as gold shows up way better. And now it's time for masking. I took the measurements of the circle and used a compass to draw out the correct circumference. This allows me to have the correct curve on the piece without having to use my X-Acto knife on the object, as getting to that second ring was really hard. Painted the unmasked parts in purple and had to mask even more. This thing was really hard to mask and I just went in after and fixed up any mistakes. I freehanded a lot of the small parts, including the bells. Those were painful. I originally wanted to paint all the pieces separately and then put them together, but the support poles wouldn't go in enough to the rings and wouldn't be stable. I did make my own tassels for the bottom of the prop. I just used Copic marker to put the gradient in. After gluing everything into place, mostly the resin pieces, the Kagura Verity is complete. And with that, the Kagura Verity is complete. It was a very interesting prop to build with lots of experimentation, and I really like how the resin pieces turned out. With that, let's get on to the montage.